elevated, albeit moderated, domestic agricultural price inflation. When the bank's Monetary Policy Committee met on the 17th and 20th of November, it was advised that inflation was projected to rise above the bank's target range between December 2023 and March 2025, due in large part to the impact of announced increases in selected public passenger fares. You may recall that PPV fares were increased by 19% on the 15th of October, with a further 16% increase announced to take effect April 2024. The forecast also assumes that international grain prices will continue to fall, while shipping prices are projected to remain low and stable, given a projected slowdown in global growth. Fuel prices are forecasted to remain elevated over the next 3 quarters, and inflation expectations are projected to stabilize. However, in the context of Tuesday's announcement by the Minister of Finance and Public Service of a temporary 2-step reduction in JUTC bus fares effective January 1 and April 1, 2024, inflation is now projected to generally remain within the target range, except for December 2023 and a few months in 2024. The announced fiscal measure will have a material impact on tempering the potential inflationary pressures of the PPV fare increases. The success to date in controlling inflation could give rise to the expectation of a softening in the monetary policy stance. However, following a careful survey of the economic environment, the MPC noted that beyond the impact of increases in transportation fares, the risk to inflation remained skewed to the upside, meaning that there could be higher inflation. On the upside, higher than projected future wage adjustments in the context of the tight domestic labor market could put further upward pressure on inflation. The recent rains are also expected to reverse the projected declines in agricultural prices that had been built into the forecast between November 2023 and February 2024. On the downside, oil prices could trend below the forecast. We are already seeing evidence of this, as WTI crude oil futures averaged US $78 per barrel for the month to date, below the bank's projection of around $90 per barrel. It is in this context that MPC announced the decision yesterday to hold the policy rate at 7% to maintain tight Jamaica dollar liquidity conditions, as well as engender relative stability in the foreign exchange market. The bank, in furtherance of the MPC's decision, also took the operational decision to increase the spread between the policy rate and the standing liquidity facility, SLF, to 300 basis points from 200 basis points, effective today, the 22nd of November 2023. This is intended to allow more flexibility in the bank's open market operations and to allow money market interest rates more latitude to move up and down based on the circumstances in the market. Earlier, on the 6th of November this year, the bank also removed the absolute limits on the foreign currency net open positions applicable to authorized dealers. This could help to promote relative stability in the exchange rate. Going forward, the bank will continue to review the effectiveness of these limits and their impact on market conditions on a quarterly basis. Let me now discuss the foreign exchange market and the outlook for the economy. The foreign exchange market has remained relatively stable within a band over the last 4 months, reflecting continued strong tourism and remittance flows, as well as the actions taken by the bank. To prevent undue volatility in the foreign exchange market, BOJ has sold approximately $887 million via its BFIXIT facility for the 2023 calendar year to the end of October. When these sales are set against BOJ purchases, however, the result is that the bank net purchased approximately US $893 million over the period, almost double that purchased over the same period in 2022. One of the positive outcomes of the stable exchange rate is that it has helped to anchor inflation expectations. In the bank's latest survey of inflation expectations, less than 16% of the respondents indicated that movement in the exchange rate was the most important factor behind their view of future inflation. This compares to 24% in the previous survey. In addition, respondents indicated that communication by the central bank has played a greater role in informing their views about inflation. This, to say the least, is encouraging. Looking at the outlook for the Jamaican economy, it continues to expand. Despite the impact of drought conditions on the agriculture sector, the PIOJ announced yesterday that GDP for the September 2023 quarter is estimated to have grown by 1.9%, and there are signs that the economy continued to expand in the December 2023 quarter. The notable low unemployment rate at July 2023 of 4.5%, supported by anecdotal information about wage adjustments in selected private sector industries, indicates that the domestic labor market remains tight. Looking ahead, the bank continues to project that real GDP will grow by 1 to 3% for financial year 2023-24 and between 1 to 2% over the medium term. Ladies and gentlemen, although inflation has trended downward and is back within the target range, Jamaica is not yet out of the woods where consumer price increases are concerned. Among other factors, future MPC monetary policy decisions will depend on the incoming data relating to the strength of risk to inflation. The MPC is committed to using the full set of tools to attain its objective of anchoring inflation sustainably within the target range in the shortest possible time. Thank you, and I'll take your questions.
Good morning, Governor. Governor, we've had the recent rains and the impact on food prices. You had the PIOJ, Jamaica Agricultural Society, saying that food prices over the Christmas period could be elevated to as far as 35%. What's your take on that? And does it take you way out of what you had projected?
Well, we don't have any firm information yet, data, but Robert, you're the expert on this.
Thank you, Governor. Morning, everybody. The only information we have are the anecdotal information coming out of the Ministry of Agriculture that we've seen damages in some of the food basket areas like St. Elizabeth, St. Catherine, Clarendon, and of course St. Thomas was hard hit. Portland, more so than the others. Our forecasts had assumed that coming off the back of the drought and coming into the favorable weather conditions that we saw, agricultural supplies would have improved, and our baseline forecast had seen where for December there would have been some improvement on a quarter-over-quarter basis in production. And consequently, we were anticipating that agricultural prices would start to fall. All of that is now off the table. We are awaiting the data to make a better assessment, but our underlying assumption is that it's going to derail those declines that we had built in. The extent to which is something that we will have to assess. Agriculture, as you know, is very important for the CPI. It represents about 9.5% of total consumer prices. So this is something that is going to be the subject of our usual scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stennett. Are there any further questions?
I've got a few, but I don't want to just go by myself.
I'm not sure. Hello, good morning.
Go ahead, Mr. Miller.
Yes, good morning to you. Honorable Governor, how are you doing, sir? You're good. Can hardly hear, Governor. Mr. Technical Man, can give me a little bit of audio, please?
Yes, I'm good. Good to,
Oh, yeah, good.
good to hear from you.
Blessings. Yes, thank you, sir. I'm from the constituency of Kingston 21, or Jamaica 21. I noticed that you have been carrying on a very steady maypole dancing with the inflation since April up to October. And it all goes well for the skills and the maneuverings of your department. And it's not gymnastics, it's just professionalism and understanding the market quite clearly. And it would seem that you have perfected it or developed a kind of a management of this through either the people who set prices, like the merchants, workers and their unions, to understand that inflation is coming down, so that they should kind of keep down their prices and keep more moderate salary increases, so that inflation expectation is drastically reduced. To what extent, though, does political will and political management assist the process that you're trying to maneuver? I don't know if I'm clear.
Let me try to answer that. I wouldn't say political management. I would say the coordination of fiscal and monetary policy is very important. It's important in our economy. It's important in all market-driven economies. And we see it the world over. Pre-pandemic, we were very supportive of growth by having a policy rate of 0.5%. So that's monetary policy helping with growth in the economy. So that when the Minister of Finance makes the announcement about PPV, not PPV, but JUTC fares, that is fiscal policy giving support to monetary policy. We are all working to the same objective, which is stability within the country, low inflation, growth. And it exists in other economies. Barbados, for example, does quite a bit of price subsidies. We don't do that as explicitly, but this move by the Ministry of Finance is welcomed, because it really would have put us out of joint with inflation. Instead of being in a corridor and trying to settle ourselves down in there, building expectations that we are now within the corridor and can look to in the not too distant a future, bring rates down, it would have shot inflation out of the corridor for an extended period of time. So we welcome that cooperation of fiscal policy with monetary policy.
So am I to understand then, Governor, that the BOJ is comfortable with the level of communication about inflation and getting people at all levels of the society to understand that inflation is a dynamic thing, and the importance, therefore, of low table inflation to the economy and to the consumers, you know, is very important.
Yes.
And that any plans to increase communication, but no, go ahead and so you can answer the next one, please.
Well, I would say yes. It's a long-term endeavor. We have been on this track for a couple of years now, not as long as many other established central banks, but certainly since we have had our mandate to make inflation targeting our central mandate, we have been educating and working practically to keep inflation within the corridor. But it takes a while for everybody to build confidence in what the bank is doing.
Any plans, Governor, to increase the communication around the issues of inflation in that regard?
Well, if you have suggestions of what more we can do, remember we have this press briefing every quarter, and every time the MPC meets, we send out a press release. If you have other suggestions, we'd welcome it.
No, it's just that I suppose we would agree that inflation, behavior change is what affects inflation somewhat, eh?
Yes.
So, yes, go ahead.
We also have meetings with the private sector. Mr. Stennett here in particular, he leads that discussion that we have with the private sector members, where we hear from them directly what's happening, and they hear from us as to what is our expectation, what are the tools we're deploying, and how we expect it to work. So at all levels, whether it's a consumer level or it's a price-setting business level, we are in constant dialogue and communication.
Bless your heart, Governor. I don't know if I'm allowed to pose another question, or if somebody else might have a question there. Miss Melanie?
Please go ahead, Mr. Miller.
Thank you so much. Governor, Mr. Man who love rainfall. They call me a country boy. COP28 and the UN climate conference is opening in Dubai in a few days. Climate change is one major thing on the agenda as it relates to disasters, and have the potential to, and with our region, it has the potential to derail any plans that the government or the central bank might have. Now, how important is climate change and climate financial issues are part of the central bank's planning? And are you integrating all of this into your work and your daily planning?
Good question, and I'm going to ask Mr. Stennett to address it, because he's a specialist that is working on that area.
Yeah, thank you, Governor. I think there's no gainsaying that climate change is extremely important to the central bank. It is just last year, however, that we have taken deliberate steps to understand better the implications of climate change for financial stability, and to start the planning process to understand these implications, and B, to put in place supervisory oversight of the financial sector, so that we are in a better position to guide the mitigation of these risks for the financial sector. The project that we are involved in is going to be a multi-year project built into two phases. The first phase is coming to an end, is coming to a close at around the end of December. We are in the process of publishing a set of commitments that the central bank will be undertaking over the next 2 to 3 years. And these commitments generally revolve around the central bank committing to enhancing the capacity of its own staff, as well as capacity of the financial sector to understand financial climate-related risks. We are also in the process of getting data in. Climate-related data spans a wide range of portfolios, including physical risks, as well as risks that come to the financial system through changes in policy. And then ultimately, all of this planning is going to roll up into our being able to conduct what we call climate stress test assessments. which will then put us in a position to provide the financial industry with guidelines and standards that allow them to, at the same time, understand their exposure to climate change and to put in place management strategies to mitigate these risks. So the long and short,
Yes,
is that we are started the process fairly aggressively, but it unfortunately is a multi-year process that will ultimately lead to us being able to buttress the system against climate-related shocks.
Mr. Stinnett, thank you very much, sir. So it's a multi-pronged mitigation planning process.
Yes.
All right, thank you, sir. I yield to the next person.
Go ahead, Al.
Hello? Governor, I'm going to be very interested in your answer to this question, and perhaps some of your other colleagues could chip in here as well. This is the last briefing for the year. When you look back at the year, the BOJ has done remarkably well. I mean, the financial sector was under siege. There's no question about it this year. We don't have to go into the precise details. But when you look at inflation, what you said about wages, and in light of that, what we may be facing now, the management of the foreign exchange, there's a lot to pat yourselves on the back about, but what's your overall view of that? I know you're known for being rather diplomatic, but it's the end of the year. I think you can probably let loose a little bit now.
I heard somebody say, no, Governor. Yes, my lawyer. But Al, yes, I think that BOJ has a lot to be proud of in its role to bring inflation to where it is. We can't take all the credit. International commodity prices have come off, and that undoubtedly has played a big part in bringing inflation back into the corridor. But if you imagine, even with that happening, had the exchange rate gone to 165, 170, we would be like on a treadmill. Commodity prices coming down, but as they hit our border and we translate to Jamaican dollars, they go up. Also, if the economy was awash with liquidity, and persons had no problem in accessing loans and expanding businesses, again, we would find that prices are rising. So the Bank of Jamaica, through its monetary policy tools, have played also an important role in making inflation come back through to the corridor. So we're pleased with it. We're not complacent about it. We see the risks of the future. We see some of the deficiencies in deploying our tools. It's been a great experience in the last 2 years for us. And I think I've said it here before. I hope that Robert and some of his team are going to write it up. Because for a small, open economy like Jamaica to be inflation targeting from a brand new independent bank. Remember, we became independent in April 21. Then we had the pandemic, and then we had this hyperinflation internationally. So it's been a tremendous experience, and I think we have done pretty well, but we remain vigilant about the future.
All right, so I have a few quick questions from a previous conference that was held. So it's just following up. So my understanding is that, Governor, you had expressed concerns about 2 SIFIs. I want to know if it is that you had spoken after on the matter about what those concerns were, and what is it that the BOJ is doing to mitigate any of those risks.
I don't recall saying that I had concerns about two SIFIs,
Okay.
but I do have concerns about SIFIs. And let's step back a little and define a SIFI. A SIFI is a systemically important financial institution. And they are systemically important because they are so large. They may be multi-dimensional. That is, they are not only in banking, they're in insurance, there is all kinds of other activities. Plus, they have relationships, big relationships with other enterprises in the financial sector. So every central bank is very concerned about SIFIs in their constituency. And we are no different. We have concerns. And I'm going to ask Jide to speak specifically about some of the actions that we're taking to deal with this issue of SIFIs. Jide?
Thank you, Governor. So, I mean, essentially in our regulatory framework, we want to ensure that institutions that meet the criteria of being systemically important, they hold additional capital on their balance sheets. And this is just rainy day funds, so that if they in fact get into periods where cash flows are low or investments they have made don't perform as well as they're anticipating, they can absorb those losses on their balance sheet and still remain going concerns. Aside from that, we are pegging that with broader reforms in terms of capital adequacy under our Basel III framework, where they have to recognize not just market risk and credit risk, but they also have to recognize operational risk and hold capital against those risks. So what you're really requiring of financial institutions, particularly the larger ones, is to basically internalize the risks associated with their business and ensure that they themselves on their own can absorb those risks over time. And this is broadly consistent with how other jurisdictions require their systemically important financial institutions to operate.
Okay. All right. So the other thing that I have is it's really a follow-up as well. And this is around the introduction of competition through digital banks. I'm hoping maybe if you could speak on any new developments around that.
Well, I don't think there are any new developments, but I am encouraging of
Okay.
new developments. I believe that greater efficiency in the banking business can be brought about by having more digital transactions, both amongst the current stock of banks, but also if there are new banks that want to start up and be purely digital, we'd be very welcoming of them. I think that, you know, to get more competition going, we need to get more digitization going, including the digitization of the KYC information of customers. So, for example, if every customer's KYC information is stored in one place digitally, and a customer wants to move from bank A to bank B, by simply indicating that to the repository that they want to move, their data immediately goes to the other institution and the bank account can be opened within minutes. It's that kind of ease and convenience that consumers want in order to be able to make better choices about who they bank with. So that form of digitization we are pursuing ourselves. We have the World Bank working with us in trying to develop a central depository of eKYC information.
All right. So on the digital, along the digital line, we've seen more cyber attacks happening, and I just want to get a better sense. Well, not just in the banks, but whether cyber attacks are just fraud in general. So even yesterday or earlier this week or late last week, I believe, Flow announced that they'll stop accepting checks as payments because of what's happening with fraud. So JPS and Flow are now, I just want to get a sense of whether how concerned the BOJ is about not the cyber attacks and fraud in general, not just for the financial sector, but overall, and how this and how if you have any concerns about any destabilization.
Yeah, we're very concerned, and we monitor the financial sector regularly. They have to report to us all the cases of fraud and any cyber attack that they experience. Dr. Lewis over there is the expert on this. Jide, you want to speak on it?
Sure. So just to echo what the governor said, yes, we are deeply concerned about the incidence of fraud across the system. And to the extent that these frauds impact customers of banks, of course, we would be concerned there as well. There are several things that we are doing together with financial institutions to ensure that they have a robust framework to manage cyber threats. And there are a couple of initiatives that we're looking to launch in the very near future, including giving guidelines to financial institutions in terms of how they should go about strengthening their cyber frameworks.
Okay.
This is, of course, going to be done through a consultative process, as we do with all our guidelines. And then once we get through that consultation process, we will be enshrining it into a standard of best practice, which, of course, has binding obligations on the licensees in terms of their commitment to follow these sets of procedures. We are also constantly in touch with them. I can say over the last 3 months, we have met with every single board across the financial sector, the banking sector in particular, speaking about corporate governance and helping them to understand that that the buck stops with them in relation to ensuring that their internal control environment is robust. So, there are a suite of things that we intend to engage with them on over the ensuing months to make sure that we don't allow these criminals to take advantage of our financial system and to take advantage of customers of financial institutions. So it's a matter that we take very seriously. In terms of the impact of cyber and other frauds on the system, though, I want to say that it is still quite small. It's not a threat to the stability of the financial system. The banking sector is about $1.6 trillion in terms of assets. Banking frauds at its peak is about $1 billion, and it has meandered between $500 million and $1 billion. Now, I know that is a large figure when you talk about an individual.
Right.
So, I do understand that there is a concern when we hear these numbers. But we have to remember that this is spread across 10 institutions. So what you're really talking about on average is about $100 million of losses per institution on average, if you were to spread it around. Just to give you some context behind that particular number. So it's something that we're watching. We obviously do not want even a dollar of frauds going to criminals. So it's not something that we're content with. And we want to see it coming down and being maintained on a downward trend.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis.
Cheers again, mate. Governor, some of the financial institutions are bemoaning the asset tax and saying with all what they've had to bear, the asset tax is a burden. They agreed to do this thing just before COVID to help the country. Now the country's back on its feet, but they're getting hit with the asset tax. What's your view on that situation?
I think they should put that question to the Minister of Finance. It's not.
They said they did, and they're not getting his ears.
They still need to put it to the Minister of Finance.
Durant Pate, please go ahead, Durant.
Morning, Governor. I start from where you left off, the whole talk about digitization. The conventional wisdom, Governor, is that digitization is supposed to bring with it cheaper costs and operational efficiencies. Now we observe where the converse seems to be true in the banking sector. I.e., I use my bank as an example, whereby I used to transfer funds from one account to another account, and now I am being imposed a fee to transfer funds from one account to another account within the same bank. I ask you to comment on this observation, and essentially, why is it that we are digitizing our banking sector, but yet still consumers, depositors are being hit with these costs?
Morning, Durant. I am a little surprised to hear that that is the case. I need to quickly check to see if that is happening to me at my bank. I haven't looked recently. But you're right. I mean, digitization should not be at the expense of customers. Let me say, one of the things that we're working towards, and I'm going to ask Senior Deputy Governor to speak to it in a minute, this Twin Peaks project, where we are going to be building out a market conduct specialized regulator, is very important, because they need to take on issues like these. They are burning issues to consumers, but we need to have the authority, the power in law to be able to address these issues. And sometimes we don't have it. So the Twin Peaks model and the legislative changes to come with it are really very important. And if you allow me to just ask Wayne to speak to the question of where we are with Twin Peaks, and then you can continue.
Thanks, Governor. Good morning, everyone. Well, the joint BOJ FSC team, we have been working assiduously since January, February. As you're aware, our objective is to ensure that the government can at least table in Parliament the reforms by 2025. That's a very short time frame, but we are working assiduously. I mean, when you look across the globe at other countries, this process takes a much longer time period, because it is a very involved process involving a number of components: the legislative components, the actual regulations and how you implement the regulations on this regime, and also other institutional components such as the structure. So where we are now is that we are working with the Ministry of Finance to finalize the submission that will go to the Minister and Cabinet. And I'm sure after that we'll be in a better position to delve and provide more details in terms of the framework. But just to say, we have looked carefully in terms of the delineation of regulatory and supervisory responsibilities across the two peaks. As you know, Bank of Jamaica will be responsible for prudential supervision of all financial institutions, while the new FSC will be responsible for market conduct and consumer protection. And as the Governor hinted, a key outcome of this reform, which the Minister has indicated, is that we must have a more robust consumer protection framework for financial institutions. So we are looking carefully at how we can strengthen the legislative and operational mechanisms to ensure that we can address the various concerns that members of the public has as it relates to financial services. Also, it's important to note that both regulatory arms, both peaks, the Bank of Jamaica and the new FSC, the objective is to ensure that they are very much independent and have the capacity to execute on their mandates. And in this context, of course, the governance arrangements and the decision-making arrangements will be important, and also the accountability arrangements will be important, as well as how we actually fund supervisory activities. So as you can imagine, that this is going to involve a raft of legislative changes, which we are working on. And I'm sure at an appropriate time in the near term, we'll be able to speak a little bit more on these. But in the meantime, we're also looking internally at the institutional structure, in particular the organizational structure for both the prudential regulator, Bank of Jamaica, as well as the new FSC, and looking at the staffing requirements. We are not yet settled on that as yet. We still have some way to go there. But we have onboarded an international consultant who has expertise in this area. So we're hoping certainly within another couple of months we'll have a better sense as to how internally in both organizations the regulatory operations will be structured. So work continues apace, and at an appropriate time we will provide more details.
So Durant, if just fast forward a couple of years, and what you will see is an enterprise FSC, the new FSC, with strong consumer protection powers, as well as EKYC repository, where if you are fed up with your bank, you just say, well, let me find another bank. You find it and you just instruct the repository. Send my KYC data to that bank. I'm opening an account. And by afternoon, you have a new account. So that's what we are working towards.
Okay, thank you, well, Governor. That is good and applaudable. But the here and now is more important. But to the next thing, though, and it's a simple. The credit for more than 2 years. I know that they are or they have started to impose a monthly, I think it's monthly, insurance charge. I saw on social media about 2 or 3 customers complaining about the same. Now, in my case, my credit card charges 51 or 53% and balance is not paid. And it just dawned on me, Governor. A bank is a business invest and expect to get a premium for their risk. Why is it that these banks have no risk? Basically, because if I am being imposed an insurance cost, an added insurance cost, I'm being imposed with a 53% for unbalanced. I think BOJ need to come in. They are charging astronomical cost for interest, and yet still they bore no risk.
Durant, what I would promise is that I will ask GD to look across the banking sector to see what are the current fees, are any of them new, and are any of them jumping out at us that look, unfounded. So give me a little while with that, and I'll ask GD to execute on that as soon as possible.
A third question, Governor, and I looked at your MPC report, and forgive me if I'm reading it wrong, but I think I saw where the MPC saying that they're projecting inflation to be above the target from 2023 to 2025. If that is so, can you share some light on this?
No, Durant, I think what the statement is saying is that when the MPC met, we had no information about the Ministry of Finance bringing down JUTC fares. And in the absence of that, inflation, our model did say inflation would accelerate above the corridor from this year right through to March of 2025. That is a profound effect that the fare PPV increase would have had, both of itself as well as a knock-on effect. Because you can imagine all the people who take these vehicles to work and from work, they have to pay extra. They're going to ask for more. So there's a kind of second round effect. that increase would have had. So what the statement sets out is that had we not had the JUTC, the announcement that JUTC prices would be cut, inflation would have soared above the 4 to 6% corridor and stayed there for the better part of a year and a half, or a little bit more than a year and a quarter, really. Having had the statement now from the ministry and the commitment from the ministry, we think that we will settle back down in that 4 to 6% corridor, with the exception maybe of December and 1 or 2 months next year, when we normally have a little spike in inflation due to a number of things, not the least of which is weather-related inflation.
Thank you, Governor. Are there any further questions?
May I?
Governor, how do you see the upcoming tourism season? And how I heard one particular commentator noting that receipts from tourism and remittances haven't covered the trade gap. But how important do you see it more so this year? And can you give us an overview of how you see just the geopolitical landscape, given what we're in now? We may have yesterday. You heard about the situation with the U.S. and Iraq. We hear that there may be a ceasefire with Israel and Hamas. But what do you see the implications of all this?
Well, I can't recall in recent times a more turbulent geopolitical situation. It's like, it never ends. It gets complicated even more, compounded. And that is one of the biggest threats to domestic inflation, because it disrupts supply chains and everything else. So the geopolitical situation is very much on our minds when we look at inflation. Wayne, I wonder whether you have some comments that you want to make on that question from Al.
Yeah, well, I'll try and address briefly the corresponding question about the impact on tourism and remittances, because I think the immediate concern then is first of all, how would this impact global economic activity, and then the knock-on effect on Jamaica. Of course, as the governor says, we are in a very uncertain period, and there are substantial risks to overall economic activity. But I think the good thing in that in all of this, our main source market, in particular the US, has been very resilient. We have seen so far that consumption by US consumers, that continues to hold up and continue to grow. Although we expect to slow down this year and into next year, it has still been much stronger than we have anticipated. And we are seeing the knock-on effects on that in terms of our tradables, in terms of tourism in particular, and up to August, visitor arrivals are growing at about 11%. We have, in this recent round, have actually revised up our forecast for visitor arrivals for this year to between 6 and 7%. I think it is, Robert. We were anticipating a much sharper slowdown. But again, the numbers continue to perform much better than we had anticipated. Remittances have slowed, and we had expected it. In September, remittance for the year-on-year in September declined between a little bit over 1%. But there again, although remittances are slowing, it's actually still doing better than we had anticipated. And the levels of remittances are actually still remain above the pre-pandemic levels. So certainly in terms of our external trade in terms of goods and services or exports of services, those continue to perform strongly and better than anticipated, although we continue to expect a slowdown. You made the comment that, or the query whether or not tourism is covering the goods trade gap. Well, what I'll say is this. For the last fiscal year, we ran a current account surplus of 1.9% on the balance of payments. For June this year, for the June quarter, the first quarter of this fiscal year, the surplus was between 200 and 300 million on the current account. And that compared to a surplus of under 100 million for the last fiscal year. So again, we're continuing to see a very strong, robust external account. For this fiscal year, we expect that going forward, we may not have such a large surplus. In fact, we could probably have a very small deficit. But overall, we expect that the current account should remain very strong and very, very, very robust. But of course, we continue to watch those geopolitical risks, the risk to commodity prices that could actually have an impact on us.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Mr. Miller, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you so much. Governor, just a little bit of flashback. And forgive me if it sounds silly, but the last time you diligently tried to explain the question of inflation, it sounded as though you were giving the data for the election, and it created a lot of excitement on the ground. Now, there's also the feeling and rumor that there's likely to be an election sometime between now and the end of January. Would that have any significant impact on inflation, whether in terms of the carnival of spending and consumerism that is anticipated, or the fact that there's going to be that kind of a spending, it might affect you? I don't know. Could you shed some light?
Well, I can't shed light on whether there will be an election. I believe that but
in the event,
local government elections are constitutionally required in February. That's my understanding.
right.
I don't know whether there will be a carnival of expenditure, but it would have to be a very big carnival for it to really impact inflation as such. I don't know if the political parties have that power that they can impact inflation. Yeah.
I said, just
would it be caution any wide election spending, given the negative effect it might have on inflation?
Yeah, a good question.
Robert Irwin, I don't know whether you want to comment on the context of, let's say, $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion of expenditure in total money supply and the impact on inflation. Can't be that big.
No, what I would say is that as long as overall fiscal policy, the government continues to follow its current fiscal trajectory, and fiscal policy continues to be prudent and thereby complement our monetary policy stance, I mean, we're not seeing a major concern there. I mean, how the government allocates expenditure within that envelope, that's an issue for the government. But once overall the fiscal dynamics remain strong and remain on the current path that it's on, then we don't see any major concerns.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Are there any further questions?
Melanie, could I ask Natalie to say something about the new notes and the ABMs and so forth?
All right. Thank you, Governor. All right. So the new polymer banknotes were issued, we all know, 15th of June of this year. At that time, in terms of issuance was, obviously low at that time. Now I can report that since November 10th, all banknotes being issued by BOJ are the polymer banknotes. Hence, in terms of currency in circulation, the value of currency in circulation for banknotes, a little over 70% are the polymer banknotes. With regards to the ABM, in terms of deposits and withdrawals from ABMs, I'm happy to say that at this point, across the ABM network in Jamaica, 98 to 99% of the ABMs can dispense and accept the polymer banknotes. That's it. I don't know if there are any further questions regarding that.
I mean, there's a lot of brouhaha about the polymer notes, but isn't it the case that really, I mean, you just got to get used to it? I mean, I've got notes in my wallet, but I can't tell you which one is blue, green, or whatever. But given time, I guess you get to know, or you get to figure it out. I mean, what's your assessment?
Okay, so in terms of recognition, it will take time for people to recognize, but each of the 6 denoms are different in color. So I don't imagine there ought to be any confusion in terms of mixing up the notes. It's just for people now to recognize. And remember, what we try to do is, relative to the old notes, we try to maintain to the best possible the same color scheme. So if you look back, starting from the lowest denom, the 50, the red, right? For the 1,000, the blue. For the 100, the green. What we changed was the 500 to the purple because for the old notes, the 500 and the 5,000 were very similar in color and led to a lot of confusion. So now what we have done is kept the brown, that brownish color for the 5,000, and the 500 is now purple. And of course, there's a new denomination, the 2,000, which is gray. So it just takes time. I mean, I see where people put on social media that they are mixing up the 100 and the 1,000. I mean, one is blue, one is green. I mean, yeah. And even if you don't look at the color, you can know your subjects on the banknotes, eh? Right, so it's gonna take some time. But the problem of mixing up the 500 and the 5,000, which was real, that should no longer exist.
And you know, all I always say to my friends, when you're in the United States and you have the currency, they're all the same color. How do you distinguish? You look at the number. You know, one of them said 20 and one of them said 50, and that's the basis on which you make a distinction. You don't know the people's faces on it or anything. And they're all the same color. So.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. Given that it's the last time we'll be meeting under these circumstances, Bank of Jamaica wishes you all the best for the Christmas season. Thank you.
Traveling to Jamaica? Submit your customs and immigration declaration online for faster processing. Visit the enterjamaica.com portal, complete and submit your declaration prior to departure. Upon arrival, proceed to the immigration